Salam, peace be upon you. My name is Muhammad Laiq Siddiqui, the father of Holoface. Welcome back. We are finally here, episode 14, where we are weaving the rules, the foundation not just to reconstruct our universe, but any universe to ever emerge, no matter how strange, how alien, and how bizarre. Let me tell you what episode 14 really is, in a way your mind can hold. Not as math on a page, but as a living machine you can walk around inside. Imagine you are standing at the edge of a vast wilderness at night. You don't know what kind of land it is. You don't know if there are mountains, rivers, or cities. You don't even know if the ground is solid. All you have is a lantern that can briefly illuminate a small circle around your feet. You take one step, you shine the lantern, you take another step, you shine it again. You cannot see the whole wilderness. You cannot see the sky. You cannot see the end of anything. You can only see a finite patch, and even that patch is noisy. Fog, wind, shadows, and the imperfections of your lantern. Now here is the question that episode 14 answers with terrifying precision. How do you turn finite local glimpses into a certified map of reality, without ever pretending you saw more than you did, without smuggling in assumptions, without inventing invisible furniture, and without collapsing into fantasy? Episode 14 is that machine. It is not a story of how the universe began. It is not a timeline. It is not cosmology. It does not say what happens next. It does not talk about evolution, entropy, or probability. It refuses all of that. Episode 14 is more severe than that. Episode 14 is the compiler, the extraction engine, the rules of what must be true for any universe to become publicly readable as structure. And the reason this matters is simple. If you don't have this engine, then every grand theory you propose is built on sand. You can say space, time, energy, particles, fields, forces, but you won't be able to prove you earned any of them. You'll be like someone describing a city they've never visited, drawing streets they never measured, claiming laws they never tested, and then getting angry when reality doesn't obey their imagination. Episode 14 is the discipline that prevents that. It begins with one ruthlessly minimal fact. Phi is the only primitive we are allowed. Phi is not a substance, not a thing, not a cosmic fluid, not space-time, not mind. It is simply the capacity for cyclic comparison, like a clean ring that lets you say, this differs from that, in a way that can be repeated. And then episode 14 adds one equally ruthless rule. The only public access to Phi is through differences. Not what Phi is, but how Phi differs between two events inside a licensed window. If someone claims they measured absolute Phi, episode 14 doesn't argue. It simply says, that is not a public claim. That is private poetry. It cannot enter the shared universe of science. So from the first breath, episode 14 establishes something most human thinking refuses to accept. The universe is not what you can imagine. It is what you can certify. Now, if differences are the only public doorway, what is the raw input to this machine? Not space points, not moments in time, not coordinates. Episode 14 refuses to begin there because those are already interpretations. Instead, it begins with a more primitive object, a network of comparisons. Imagine you and I are listening to a choir singing behind a wall. We cannot see the singers, but we can compare notes. This voice is higher than that one. This beat arrives before that beat. This tone changes faster than that tone. If we collect enough comparisons, we can reconstruct structure, maybe even map where voices are, how many there are, how they move. But we must never pretend we started with positions or meters. We started with comparisons. That is the soul of episode 14. It treats reality as something you can reconstruct from relational differences, not something you get for free as a background stage. But then comes the most important moment, the moment that turns this from philosophy into an operational engine: licensing. Episode 14 says, if you want to claim structure, you must first produce a passport, a window passport. This sounds bureaucratic until you realize what it protects you from. Because without passports, human beings always do the same thing. They take a local observation and inflate it into a global truth. They measure a small region and declare a law of the universe. They see a pattern and assume it is permanent. They find a nice equation and start worshipping it. Episode 14 ends that behavior. A window is a finite patch of the event set, your lantern circle in the darkness. The passport is the birth certificate of any claim you make inside that circle. It forces you to declare boundaries: what is inside, what is outside, where the edge is. It forces you to declare how you sampled, what comparisons were made, how dense, what adjacency relations exist between your sampled points. It forces you to declare provenance, what instrument or protocol produced these comparisons, with what audit trail. It forces you to declare a validity mask, which subregion is actually certified for extraction, and which parts are contaminated by boundary effects, instrument artifacts, or aliasing. And episode 14 makes this an absolute gate. No passport, no claim. This single discipline, if people truly followed it, would change the psychology of knowledge on Earth. Because so much argument is really about hidden window mismatch. Two people claim to be talking about the same thing, but they are not. Their windows are different. Their sampling is different. Their masks are different. Their ceilings are different. Their coherence is different. Episode 14 forces those differences into daylight. Then comes coherence. This is the moment you stop treating noise as mysterious and start treating it as a license condition. Episode 14 says, below a coherence threshold, you do not get to extract high-order structure. You can still log raw comparisons, but you cannot certify derivatives, invariants, or geometry-like objects. This is not pessimism. This is honesty. It is the difference between reading a sentence and staring at smudged ink. If the letters are too smeared, you don't claim you read the paragraph. You simply say, the page is below legibility threshold. Then comes identifiability, the most brutal and necessary gate of all. Episode 14 forces every claim to pay its information cost. If you want to claim a certain level of structure, say you want to claim derivatives up to some order, you must prove the data can identify that claim. Not emotionally, not by confidence, not by vibe, by rank conditions. Does the information in the window support the dimension of the jet you are trying to recover? If not, then the claim is not wrong. It is undefined. You have spoken a sentence the language does not support. This is where episode 14 becomes a moral instrument. It turns arrogance into compilation failure. And then it does something even deeper. It defines a ceiling, a maximum permitted order of differentiation for each window, n max. This is not a guess. It is computed from sampling limits, coherence limits, and information limits. Above n max, you are not allowed to speak. Not because the universe has no deeper structure, but because your certified window does not grant you access. The universe may be infinitely rich, but your certified sentence is finite. This is one of the most important psychological reversals in the entire holophase program. The world may have infinite depth, but public science lives inside finite passports. Then episode 14 elevates uncertainty into a first-class citizen. It forces you to carry an uncertainty budget. sampling error, unwrapping error, numerical error, model mismatch, and it installs a revocation discipline. If uncertainty is mispriced, certification can be withdrawn. That is how public knowledge stays alive without becoming a religion. It stays corrigible. Now, with passports, coherence, identifiability, ceilings, and uncertainty in place, you still have one enormous problem. Phi lives on a circle. You cannot differentiate a circle-valued quantity without unwrapping it locally. You need a lift, an unwrapped real-valued representative inside your certified domain. Episode 14 treats this not as a technical trick, but as a sacred act of honesty. It says, if you want derivatives, you must construct a local lift where possible, and you must declare the equivalence class of that lift. Because lifts are not unique. You can add multiples of 2 pi or a constant shift, and the lift changes, but the underlying phi does not. So episode 14 says, anything that changes under these allowed changes is not meaning. It is representation noise. The only meaningful objects are those invariant under lift equivalence. Then, where global unwrapping fails, episode 14 demands branch cuts. Not as physics, not as drama, but as bookkeeping. You must declare where you cut, how thick the color is, what the orientation is, how integers will be tracked across overlaps. And, this is the key, you must prove cut movability invariance. If your result depends on where you drew the cut, then your result is not about reality. It is about your pencil. This is the same discipline as in carpet weaving. When you weave a complex pattern, you must keep track of where the thread crosses, where it loops, where it changes direction. If the beauty of the pattern depends on hiding your knots, then the pattern is not stable. But if the pattern survives regardless of where the knots are placed, then the pattern is real. Episode 14 is teaching the universe the same lesson. The real must survive the bookkeeping choices. Then comes the certified reconstruction domain D, the living heart of differentiation. This is the portion of your window where derivatives are allowed to exist. Window minus boundary colors, minus cut colors, minus defect neighborhoods, minus aliasing zones, minus stencil failure zones. D is where the language is legal. And this is where episode 14 becomes almost spiritual in its severity. It forces you to say, here is where I am allowed to speak, and here is where I am silent. That silence is not ignorance, it is discipline. It is what keeps the map from lying. Now, once you have a lift on a certified domain, episode 14 reveals the first forced public object. A equals d phi. This is not optional. If phi is locally liftable, then its differential exists on D. And A is the minimal carrier of change, gauge clean, representation safe, and operationally meaningful. This is the first place the universe becomes writable as structure. And from A, you get the triunity readout, omega, kappa, nu. But episode 14 refuses to let you worship these shadows. It says, they are readouts of A, not primitives. You are not allowed to treat time, space, or motion as independent furniture. They are projections of the same underlying derivative carrier. If you talk about one, you must be able to recombine back to A. If you cannot, your claim is not coherent. Then episode 14 introduces something that sounds technical, but is actually the alphabet of worlds, the finite jet tower. At each point in D, you can extract a finite stack of derivatives up to n max. That stack is the local vocabulary of the universe in that window. Every local, publicly distinguishable structure must be a function of these jets. No new local primitives allowed. This is a completeness seal at the local level. If someone claims a local observable that is not a function of the certified jet content, Episode 14 says, either you mischaracterize the observable, or you are smuggling in new primitives, or you discover the falsifier. But the extraction of jets is not enough. You need grammar checks, consistency tests that detect cheating, mistyping, and hidden obstructions. So, episode 14 installs integrability. In regions where the lift is smooth and valid, the default must vanish. If it doesn't, you don't immediately invent new forces. You diagnose. Maybe a defect lurks. Maybe a cut bookkeeping error exists. Maybe aliasing leaked in. Maybe the passport was wrong. Integrability is a lie detector for the extraction process. Then, episode 14 uses Stokes consistency. The boundary integral of A must match the interior in the allowed modulo sense. This is not physics yet, it is consistency. If boundary and interior disagree, something is wrong, and the protocol demands you classify the cause. That classification discipline is what prevents humans from turning errors into myths. Then it installs path transport consistency, Wilson-like tokens, without invoking time. Even without dynamics, even without evolution, you can ask whether phase accumulation along different admissible paths agrees modulo obstructions. If it doesn't, again, you don't invent a story, you fix the typing. Now, after local structure and grammar, the machine must do something enormous. It must stitch local truths into a global object. This is Atlas compilation. Episode 14 says, the universe, as a public structure, is an atlas. Many overlapping windows, each with its own lift, its own certified domain, its own jet content, stitched together by overlap equivalences. Meaning is not a single chart. Meaning is what survives across overlaps. And on overlaps, the difference between lifts must be an integer multiple of 2 pi plus a constant. Those integers are not decoration. They are the first global tokens of the universe. They are the glue that holds patches together. Then episode 14 demands triple overlap closure, check-like consistency. If the integers don't close, you don't have one consistent universe. You have a broken patchwork. Closure failure forces diagnosis. Either bookkeeping is wrong, or a genuine obstruction exists that must be compiled as a defect. And now we reach one of the most dramatic revelations of episode 14. Dramatic precisely because it is not drama, it is a consequence. When you try to extend smoothness everywhere, sometimes you cannot. There are places where no smooth extension exists. Those places are defects. Episode 14 insists, defects are not things, they are obstructions. But they carry quantized charges because loops around them accumulate integer winding. This is where integers are born. Not because a god wrote them into the universe, but because cyclic comparability plus smoothness plus closure produces discrete invariants. And those invariants are stable across deformation as long as you don't cross the obstruction. This is a universal mechanism. It is not ours. It is any. Episode 14 then builds the defect compiler. Classify defects by codimension, point-like, line-like, surface-like, by obstruction class, not by storytelling. Enforce charge additivity under enclosures. Enforce that charge changes require crossing. Install multi-defect linking bookkeeping so that composite configurations are described without diagram dependence. If a claim depends on a drawing, it is illegal. Only isotope is stable, domain-certified invariants count. Then comes one of the most delicate achievements. Derive geometry and effective dimension without smuggling geometry as primitive. Episode 14 allows you to extract geometry-like objects only if they are functionals of jets, defined on certified domains, invariant under allowed redescriptions, and meaningful only as equivalence classes. That is a hard gate. It prevents the ancient human habit of assuming a stage and then placing actors on it. Episode 14 says, The stage is compiled from the script of comparisons. Dimension itself becomes a readout, rank-like, Hessian-like, degeneracy typed, not a container. If you want to say this region behaves as if it has dimension D, you must show how that readout emerges from jet structure and how it changes with domain typing and ceilings. This makes dimension operational and prevents metaphysical inflation. Then, episode 14 does what every serious science must do. It compresses. It defines a redescription group, the family of allowed transformations that do not change meaning. And then it compiles a minimal invariant basis, a generator set of invariants such that any admissible observable reduces to a function of them. This is how you know you actually understood something. When you can compress it without losing content, you have the skeleton. Then it defines stability in a timeless way. Not stable over time, because time is episode 15 plus, but stable under admissible perturbations within uncertainty budgets and certified domain typing. If a signature survives those perturbations, it earns the right to be treated as an entity. Again, not a substance, not a little bit of existence, but a stable certificate. Then it stratifies scales, without telling a story of history. Scales arise from window size, ceilings, masks, aliasing, and which invariants remain stable under refinement. This is crucial. Episode 14 does not say first quantum, then atoms, then stars. That would be dynamics. Episode 14 says different strata correspond to different access regimes. You can speak in different scales because your windows and ceilings permit different kinds of structure extraction. Finally, episode 14 seals completeness and installs the ultimate falsifier, the escape test. It says, if there exists a reproducible, licensed public structure that survives all passports, all uncertainty discipline, all invariance requirements, and yet cannot be encoded by the episode 13b language compiled through the episode 14 pipeline, then either phi monism is falsified or the language must be extended with proof. Either way, we do not hide. We do not patch with mythology. We record the negative result, we archive it, and we let reality teach us. And then, episode 14 ends with a scope handoff. Everything that moves, dynamics, probability, entropy, causality in time, begins only after structure has been certified. Episode 14 closes the door, locks it, and hands the key to episode 15. That lock is not a limitation. It is what makes the entire program sane. Now, if you step back, you can feel the scale of what you're holding. Episode 14 is not a theory. It is a constitution for public structure. It tells you what must be true before any universe can be readable. A universe must have comparability. It must permit differences to be measured locally. Those measurements must live in finite windows with passports. Claims must obey coherence thresholds. They must pay information costs. They must respect ceilings. They must carry uncertainty. They must unwrap circle-valued structure honestly. They must declare cuts when topology demands it. They must excise aliasing and boundary artifacts. They must build a certified domain where derivatives are legal. They must extract the first public carrier A and all finite jets. They must pass grammar checks. They must stitch local truths into a global atlas with closure. They must compile defects as obstructions and accept integers as the price of closure. They must derive geometry only as invariants, never as primitive. They must compress into invariant bases. They must define entities as stable signatures. They must stratify access into scales. They must seal completeness and accept falsification by escape. And they must stop before dynamics. This is why it can be the blueprint of any universe, because it is not a blueprint of content, it is a blueprint of legibility. It does not tell you what the universe contains. It tells you what it means for anything to count as contained in a public, coherent sense. It is the rulebook that decides whether a claim structure is real or an artifact of representation, of cuts, of sampling, of overreach, of poor coherence, or of imagination. And if you truly appreciate that, you start to see the significance. Every physics theory you've ever seen, every geometry, every field, every particle picture, quietly presupposes some version of this extraction discipline. They just don't confess it. They start in the middle, as if the stage is already built and the language is already valid. Episode 14 forces us to build the stage legally, or admit we didn't. This is not just a technical improvement, it is a moral improvement of science, because it installs humility as a formal object. It creates a world where you cannot win by confidence. You can only win by certification. So part 1 of episode 14, the part we are beginning now, is meant to leave the listener with one unforgettable recognition. You are not listening to a new cosmology. You are listening to the extraction constitution that any cosmos must obey to be a cosmos at all. Anywhere, in any possible reality, for any possible observer community that hopes to share truth. And that is why the pure phi differentiation map is not another theory among theories. It is the machine that decides what counts as a theory. It is the pipeline that turns the raw possibility of comparison into the structured certainty of a world. And if this pipeline is correct, then it doesn't matter whether the universe is made of quarks or strings or something nobody has named. It doesn't matter whether its geometry is curved or discrete or fractal. It doesn't matter whether it has 3 dimensions or 17. It doesn't matter whether it has life or not. If it is publicly readable as structure, it must pass through this kind of gate discipline, because without it, structure collapses into unlicensed storytelling. That is the scale of episode 14. That is the seriousness of the oath. And that is why we begin here, before we allow anything to move. Always, peace be upon you.